Good morning and good afternoon. I wish you all a good day, and on behalf of the CarIPI team and the EU IPO, I welcome you to this webinar session, this consultation meeting on the CarIPI's IP in Schools project. For our session today, we have three key facilitators and some additional speakers. But for the next session, I will introduce our three key facilitators, and thereafter the others will be introduced. We will start with Dr. Sharon Nagol, who is the key expert working with CarIPI on the project. She is a legal consultant and attorney at law with over 25 years of professional experience, which includes involvement in private legal practice, consulting for regional and international organizations, and academia in the areas of intellectual property law and the protection of traditional knowledge. She has advanced degrees in intellectual property, namely a PhD from Darwin College, University of Cambridge, UK, and an LLM from the Osgoode Hall Law School, York University, Canada. She will be supported by Dr. Margaret Roberta Niles, who is an education consultant from Barbados. Dr. Niles has extensive practical experience as a curriculum developer, trainer of trainers, instructional designer, and professional development specialist with over 30 years of teaching experience at the secondary and tertiary levels. Dr. Niles has actively employed her curriculum development and implementation expertise at the local and regional levels. Next, we have Dr. Justin Zephyrin, who is a faculty development specialist, the Center of Excellence of Teaching and Learning at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine. Dr. Zephyrin is a former e-learning support specialist and acting director of the center, and he continues to train educators at all school levels, both locally and regionally, in curriculum and instructional design, student engagement, and educational technologies. So those are our three key facilitators. We have Sharon Nagol will now take over in terms of the next session, which is on the IP activities at the primary and secondary school in CARIFORUM states, at least in those three countries that we have been working on in the project. Dr. Nagol.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Hollingsworth, and good morning to everyone. This segment will look at the current activities of the intellectual property offices in the region, in Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica, and Antigua and Barbuda. That is part of this specific project, IP and education in the primary and secondary schools. One of the main goals of this project is to introduce age-appropriate intellectual property principles into the primary and secondary schools. And during the course of this presentation and the course of these proceedings, you will hear about the attempts to make intellectual property principles a part of the curriculum in the primary and secondary schools. However, we have to appreciate and understand the current landscape. And there are activities that are being conducted by the intellectual property officers. And I'd like to call on Mr. Nicholas Guy-Passad, and he's supported by Ms. Sue Paul, and they will be telling us a bit of the activities that the Trinidad and Tobago Intellectual Property Office is engaged in, as well, and their initiatives with the Ministry of Education. I also want to send a special good morning to the controller of the Intellectual Property Office, Mr. Regan Asgarali. I see he has joined us. I know he's an extremely busy controller, but he has taken some time to meet with us. So good morning, Mr. Asgarali, and your senior staff, members of your senior staff who are already here as well. So thank you.
Thank you,
yes.
And looking forward to the presentation from our team representing Trinidad and Tobago today.
Okay, all right, so over to the TTIPO.
While they get their presentation up, Nicholas is a technical examiner, Office of the Attorney General at the Intellectual Property Office. And Nisa is the officer with the Ministry of Education charged with monitoring of curriculum implementation.
Thank you so much. Despite the weather, I would still like to extend a very warm, tropical Trini good morning to each and every one of you, and a good afternoon as well. Trinidad and Tobago is pleased to share our IP and, well, our IP activities at the primary and secondary school level in Trinidad and Tobago with you all today. My name is Nicholas Gaya-Prasad, and I am from the Trinidad and Tobago Intellectual Property Office.
And I am Nisa Supol of the Ministry of Education of Trinidad and Tobago. Together, we will take you through our joint presentation that seeks to give an overview of our intellectual property achievements thus far and our plans for the future, all seasoned with a rich Trinbagonian flavor. Allow us to firstly thank our contributors to our presentation. We acknowledge the work of Mr. Regan Askarali, Mr. Lalu Ramlal, and my co-presenter, Nicholas Gaya-Prasad, all of the Trinidad and Tobago Intellectual Property Office.
We would also like to acknowledge the work of Ms. Teresa Nablet-Skinner, Ms. Vindra Kasi, Ms. Marceline Peters, Ms. Trisha Jilks, Ms. Eleanor Davis, and my co-presenter this morning, Nisa Supol, all of the Ministry of Education of Trinidad and Tobago. Currently, there are two approaches to IP education. One such approach is from the Office of the Attorney General and the Ministry of Legal Affairs, which involves the granting of intellectual property rights as well as intellectual property education.
And the second is from the Curriculum Planning and Development Division of the Ministry of Education, which focuses on creativity, entrepreneurship, and intellectual property in the national curriculum from early childhood care and education to post-secondary.
The approach of the Trinidad and Tobago Intellectual Property Office so far has been through the use of guest presentations being made to both primary and secondary school students, the use of the Paroro workbooks, which we obtained permission from the Korean Intellectual Property Office to utilize, and also guest presentations at varying summer camps and innovation-based forums and workshops that are geared towards the youth specifically. Intellectual property content has also been immersed, just to mention, in courses at the university level. And when we do presentations, we also incorporate quizzes and interactive games that are meant to engage the youth and immerse them properly into intellectual property.
With respect to the approach from the Ministry of Education, there's great emphasis on entrepreneurship, innovation, and creativity in the compulsory subject technology education at secondary school from forms 1 to 3. Here, students are given challenges for which they have to provide a solution. It is a problem-based approach and prototypes are created. The Trinidad and Tobago Intellectual Property Office has assisted greatly by doing guest presentations on IP rights. For the subject grouping of visual and performing arts, the creativity of our students is encouraged in art, music, drama, and dance. And in forms 4 to 6, there is an emphasis in the regional Caribbean examinations to also include intellectual property rights. Several business subjects include objectives and assessment on intellectual property. There is also the inclusion of innovation and creativity through extracurricular activities in, for example, the STREAM education program, which involves an integrated arts and technology project, which sought to train mathematics, science, and English language arts teachers to integrate the arts in the subjects that they teach to impact teaching and learning. In addition, through the National Institute of Higher Education Research, Science and Technology, NIHERST, students and teachers have opportunities to engage with the National Science Center There are also competitions, for example, the National Secondary School Entrepreneurship Competition. Now, our education system involves a mix of government and government-assisted schools. Our target audience is mainly teachers, students, and other stakeholders from 138 early childhood care and education centers, 474 primary schools, and 134 secondary schools.
And as I mentioned before, we also target universities and youth on the whole, and also the wider society.
So allow us now to showcase the work of our students for the compulsory subject technology education. As I would have mentioned before, our students create solutions to problems. So one such example is an energy-saving apparatus for drying clothes, which can be seen on this slide in the 5th column. So you can see a piece of clothing there being dried. And students were also asked to design a storage container for everyday household items, as seen in column 1. Now, in our teacher training component for technology education, teachers developed Cake Me Away. That's the very first picture on your screen. And this was used to transport multi-tiered cakes by vehicle under Caribbean temperatures. This invention stores dry ice in a compartment to the bottom to maintain a cold temperature for the cake, and different sized holders to keep the cake in place during transportation. The elect man on the right side of your screen helps with relaxation and circulation for those who sit at a desk for long periods of time. Teachers were also exposed to intellectual property training courtesy the TTIPO, and you can see the very competent Nicholas engaged in training. Nicholas, how about you share with everyone your experience with IP training for our teachers?
Sure, thank you, Nisa. This training session in particular was a very fun one for me, as I was able to engage teachers in the technology education areas. Technology education, as Nisa would have mentioned before, it has problem solving at its core of learning, and being a patent examiner, presenting to these persons was a great opportunity. These teachers involved were interactive. They were excited to learn about intellectual property because they were taught that their creation, or from their creation, there's a potential outcome from the knowledge that they would impart onto their students for the creation of IP. I showed them that their creations could potentially be protected through the use of IP rights, and that there was a legal entity existing in Trinidad and Tobago responsible for the granting of these rights.
Thank you, Nicholas. Our visual and performing arts students are also encouraged to create art pieces and craft items representative of our indigenous culture. The maracas, as you can see to the bottom left of your screen, is an instrument synonymous with our Spanish heritage and essential for parang music that is heard at Christmas time. The dragon to the top right-hand corner of your screen is a traditional carnival character, and students are encouraged to design costumes for our greatest show on earth. Colleagues, Trinbagonians are very creative people. With that in mind, allow me to focus a bit on one of our subject offerings at the Form 4 and 5 level, which is examined regionally in the Caribbean. Of 114,642 students at the Form 5 examination level, 8,356 pursue principles of business. Some of the objectives on that syllabus include intellectual property infringement and the concept of intellectual property rights, as can be seen on the slide. With respect to our Form 6 students, one of the 3 modules studied in the Caribbean Advanced Proficiency Examination Entrepreneurship syllabus is on creativity and innovation. This also involves IP rights and protection. Of 12,402 students, 913 are currently studying this subject annually. Let us examine further the 2021 examination for CAPE Entrepreneurship. As seen on the slide, one of the 6 cases on the paper tested creativity and innovation, and another case tested IP rights.
So my fellow colleagues, while we already have creativity, innovation, and IP built into our curriculum and education system, we still have plans for greater incorporation. We are now in a period of curriculum reform, and there is a plan for an integrated approach for the inclusion of intellectual property. There are also plans for increased teacher training in intellectual property competition, in intellectual property training and education, I should say. 2 competitions, for example, were held so far for the primary and secondary school students, and also the very exciting launch of the National Intellectual Property Training Center by the Trinidad and Tobago Intellectual Property Office, which is to be seen as a hub for intellectual property education and training. So just a quick bit of information on it. It was launched in January of 2022. This project saw 31 trainers certified in IP education in the, or they were given the ability to be able to relay and convey the information that they know on intellectual property at the NIPTC. Currently, the NIPTC is being administered, or the head administration, I should say, is Mr. Regan Asgarali, the controller of the Intellectual Property Office, as well as Mr. Lalu Ramlal, who is the head for IP education in, or responsible for IP education at the Trinidad and Tobago Intellectual Property Office.
Allow us to show you a snapshot of our curriculum reform proposal. It is our plan to have increased focus on creativity and intellectual property for the youth in our national curricula. As such, we plan to shape our learning outcomes in class and out of class activities to include components of creativity and IP.
At the primary school level, one such example of a proposed introduction in reforming our national curricula could be a focus on creating poems, posters, or models on local heroes and heroines, allowing the students to get creative with a subject that inspires them would help them to learn more or get more interested in IP education.
And at the secondary level, one such activity can be the design and creation of a wearable item from locally available materials, of course, with the same aim as Nicholas would have mentioned. While we eagerly anticipate more creativity and IP inclusion in our curricula, we acknowledge that there's a need for a culture shift in our population towards greater IP awareness and appreciation.
We also acknowledge the fact that there's still an educational gap with respect to IP education among our teachers, and we hope to overcome the challenges of professional development opportunities in IP and access to IP resources by putting measures in place to increase access to these things. In our unforeseen column, we anticipate possible issues with implementation, capacity of the implementers, issues with timelines for completion, and of course, budgetary allocations.
We are very proud thus far for the training received from the World Intellectual Property Organization for teachers, curriculum officers, and officers of the TTIPO. The development of the IPO library continues and promises to be a valuable resource. The secondary school curriculum has showed great progress in inclusion of creativity and IP among youth. So from the land of the hummingbird, the stage of the greatest show on earth, our carnival, the home of the only major musical instrument to be invented in the 20th century, our steel pan, the place where the finest cocoa is grown that influences the taste of chocolate globally. The team at the Ministry of Education of Trinidad and Tobago, Theresa Neblet Skinner, Trisha Jilts, Vindra Cassie, and Nisa Supol say thank you and come basalayam with us soon.
And when the sweet rhythms of our soca music wafts through the air and you find yourself swaying a little bit, come visit us for a cold coconut with a bacon shack at Maracas Bay, and the team at the Trinidad and Tobago Intellectual Property Office, comprising of Mr. Regan Asgarali, Mr. Lalu Ramlal, and myself, Nicholas Gaya Prasad, will discuss creativity and IP education for the youth with you all some more. Thank you,
everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much from the TTIPO. And thank you for bringing some warmth and some sunshine to the region and the session. Thank you so much. Next, I will invite Chantal English from the Jamaica Intellectual Property Office to share the experience of that office with us. Chantal?
Good morning, everyone. Good morning.
Yes, thank you. Please introduce yourself to us.
Happy to join you this morning, and just want to say excellent presentation from TTIPO. Excellent. Many other things that I see going on. I see that there are some things that we are doing in Jamaica. So I'm very thrilled to see that the spirit and the drive and the energy to have intellectual property being infused in our curriculum is right across the Caribbean. Okay, so a little background, and I'm going to show you a few pictures in terms of some of the things that we have been doing. So the Jamaica Intellectual Property Office, being an agency of the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce, we have responsibility primarily for the administration of intellectual property as well as public education. And so this feature in our mandate makes it critical for us to reach out to different institutions at the primary, secondary, and tertiary level. So we also have a national intellectual property strategy, and the intellectual property strategy focuses on education in the primary, secondary, and tertiary institutions in Jamaica. And so we have been collaborating with the Ministry of Education in Jamaica to facilitate and to enable this initiative being successful. So some of the things that we have been doing in Jamaica as it relates to infusing intellectual property in our curriculum includes working with a number of individuals from the Ministry of Education. So we liaise a lot with the Deputy Chief Education Officer, who deals primarily with curriculum and support services in the Ministry of Education, not just at the ministry level, but also in schools. And one of the things that we have done is that we have been doing a lot of competitions. So I'm going to show you the winners of a competition that we had. So we had a competition essay competition, a yearly essay competition actually, which focuses not only on primary level, secondary level, but also goes to the tertiary level. And it has been very engaging, and students have learned a lot, and they have created videos and they have been sharing it on their social media platforms as well as our social media platforms. So we have had series of webinars, and the titles of our webinars is very interesting. It's called Infusing Intellectual Property in Our Curriculum. So we want to ensure that it is embedded. And so we have been working with teachers who are primarily in the visual arts sector, teachers who are also in ICT, which is Information, Communication and Technology, as well as animators. And what I am really encouraged about is even in our last IP week celebration, we had an IP week church service, and we saw students leaving from the rural area to come to Kingston just to participate in our IP week church service. And these are the same students who have been creating material, creating content, and assisting us at the IP office in sharing information on intellectual property. So we see the energy, we feel the fire, and we feel it burning. So not only at the highest level, which is the ministry level, but also in the schools, we see where students are actually having that passion, having that drive to want to learn more about intellectual property and also ways in protecting intellectual property. One of the greatest experience for me to date working with these students was when we had a primary school session, and I saw the students reading their poems, singing songs, and being so creative. I was blown. And it shows me, and it tells me that there is a need, and it's a need for us to continue to work on ensuring that these are embedded. So other things that we have been doing, so we have spent time not only at primary school level, but as I said, the secondary school level. So we've had outreach programs. So our executive director, Ms. Bellamy, she goes to different high schools and she presents to various students from different age ranges. So we are talking about from the primary school sector, we're talking from about age 9, for one cities that we know that they are at that age where they understand. But recently we have been saying that let's take it further. Let's even go to the very preschool level, because at that stage, that's where a lot of creativity is also budding. So even though we're focusing on primary, secondary, and tertiary, we also recognize in Jamaica that even at that low state, that early level, that persons are also creative. If you give a child something to draw at that level, you'll be surprised the things that you get from children that age. And so we are also not just focusing on primary, secondary, and tertiary, but we're also doing work with persons from that level, early level. We continue to work with the Ministry of Education. As I said, we had 3 webinars focusing on infusing intellectual property in the curriculum. We will continue to work with our animator, because we do have an animator that we are working directly with, who is also working at a high school, who is the head of a visual art department, and that person is very integral. So during IP Week 2021, we also launched an IP for Children tab on our website, because we recognize that even though we are doing this work closely with the school, closely with the ministries, we also recognize that having that close relationship with these teachers, because I believe that once we start on the ground and start influencing the teachers, we will have that effect that we're looking for. And so we have been getting the support, but as Trinidad says, there is always work to be done. And so we continue to push forward. We continue to guide students. It's also a part of their SBA, their syllabus. And so we are happy that there are aspects that are incorporated, but we believe that more can be done. And I'm just going to show you one of our presentations that we had about infusing intellectual property and just guiding teachers in terms of different ways in which we can make learning fun. We know that intellectual property is fun. When we think about IP, it's all about the creation of the mind and anything that the mind can conceptualize. And so that is something that we want to always embed in the minds of our children. When we're growing up in school, the only thing that we're taught about is who wants to be a doctor, lawyer, or an engineer. But what about the creative sector? Those are certain things that we try to embed in our students from an early stage. So this is an example of one of the presentations that we did at the primary level, teaching teachers as well, showing them the different ways in which they can, bring across intellectual property to their students, showing videos, why is intellectual property important? Because persons learn in different ways. So we have different methods in which we communicate these lessons to them. How can I address IP in my lesson plan? English language, is IP relevant in all subject areas? IP may be considered to be complex for some persons, but we break it down for them to tell them how is it that they can incorporate intellectual property in some of the courses that they teach. So we also look at different learning styles, learning by doing. So how is intellectual property incorporated in doing those things? Drawing, painting, board games, teaching them to, think outside the box and to go beyond. Art and craft, drawing. So there are different ways. We also encourage, one of the things that I love is that we love when our students actually do the work, as opposed to us going and always presenting. There are times when we ask them to do a presentation for us on intellectual property. So we understand exactly what they know about intellectual property, not only the students, but also the teachers. So even in our last IP week, we had teachers presenting on intellectual property, presenting on what they have been doing, what aspects of intellectual property they have incorporated in their curriculum, in their classroom whilst they're teaching. We actually have schools that have IP clubs. So there are IP clubs, there are students who are animators, different group and different creative sectors who recognize the importance of IP. So learning by doing, as I said, we encourage persons to create videos, write poems, write songs, and to speak about the work that they're doing. Also, we looked at different ways, again, in terms of how persons can continue to engage students in intellectual property. So we have like learning in small groups, again, encouraging the students to do it. Learning by doing, learning by joining together, joint authorship, joint work, and so forth, learning from others, and we share those examples. I'm going to stop sharing this and I'm going to quickly share the winners from one of our competition that we had. We had an essay competition. We continue to have this essay competition. And so these are our winners from our primary category. And as you can see, they're very young, 9 to 12 winners, and the essays were excellent pieces of work that these students use. That's our age category, 9 to 12 winners, high school winners, and they have gone on to encourage others, and they have written poems. Even in our essay competition award ceremony, they have produced their poems, and they have been doing great. And so where are we now? So currently we are still, having negotiations with the Ministry of Education. We have a proposal paper that we want to, send to the Ministry of Education so we can have everything embedded in our curriculum, because we believe that it is critical. So whilst we're talking about the primary, secondary, and tertiary, I must point out that there is at the Norman Manley Law School a special IP clinic, and every year we engage with students. So we either have virtual presentations or students come into the IP office where they have training experience on learning about intellectual property and getting a practical experience. So that at the tertiary level is very, very active, very, very efficient. The primary, secondary level, currently we are still, there are elements included in the curriculum, but we want it to be at a wider scale. So we are still in the progress in getting everything together, and I'm excited, Jaipo is excited with ensuring that everyone, primary, secondary, and tertiary level, receive that information on IP. So just want to say thanks for listening, and definitely we are excited over this end. Very happy, very excited, very thrilled. And when we see the smiles on the faces of our students, the smiles on the faces of our teachers, and also those at the ministry level, we know for sure that this is something that's great, and we want to continue to make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chantal, for another energetic presentation, 2 excellent presentations. I would like to say a few words on behalf of if I may, on behalf of the Antigua and Barbuda Intellectual Property and Commerce Office. I had the pleasure of interviewing the registrar, Ms. Ricky Camacho, and she brought me up to speed in terms of the levels of engagement of her office with the primary and secondary schools. And in similar fashion to what you have heard prior, they do have school visits, they do have competitions, and these are regular activities and engagement that are conducted by the Intellectual Property Office in Antigua and Barbuda with the primary and secondary schools. I also have the pleasure of interviewing Ms. Beverly Allen, who is here this morning. Good morning and welcome. She's the Assistant Director of Education Curriculum, and I was really heartened by her enthusiasm and interest in this particular project. And maybe during the course of the proceedings, Ms. Allen will say a few words to us. But for now, that concludes the session where we discuss the current initiatives in terms of intellectual property awareness building and education in the primary and secondary schools. I hand you back over to the moderator.
Thank you very much, Sharon, and for your team for actually bringing us up to speed as to what is happening in the different countries.